Life has a funny way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. This story begins on a cool September evening in Atlanta, with streetlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. The clock had just struck 8:30 p.m., and most people were heading home after a long day at work. Carmen Johnson was among them, her mind still buzzing from a day packed with meetings. She'd just finished the final interview for her new position as police chief, though nobody in the department had been officially informed yet. Her dark blue sedan cruised smoothly along the quiet streets as she mentally planned out her first few weeks on the job. The temporary tag on her new car fluttered slightly in the evening breeze. She'd only bought the car 3 days ago, celebrating her upcoming position with something reliable and professional, fitting for a police chief. The dealer had assured her the permanent plates would arrive within the week. Behind her, red and blue lights suddenly burst to life, painting the street in alternating colors. Carmen checked her rearview mirror and saw a patrol car signaling her to pull over. With 15 years of law enforcement experience under her belt, she knew exactly what to do. She calmly turned on her right signal, pulled to the curb, and turned off her engine. 2 officers stepped out of their patrol car, flashlights in hand. Through her side mirror, Carmen could see them approaching with the careful precision that she herself had taught many rookie officers over the years. The taller officer stayed slightly behind while his partner approached her window. "Good evening, ma'am," the officer said professionally. "We noticed your temporary tag, and we're just doing a routine check. Could I see your license and registration, please?" Carmen nodded politely, maintaining the same calm demeanor she'd always appreciated in citizens during her own traffic stops. "Of course, officer," she replied, reaching slowly for her purse on the passenger seat. She could feel both officers watching her movements carefully, exactly as they'd been trained to do. As she pulled out her documents, she couldn't help but notice how this moment perfectly illustrated why she'd accepted this new position. Every traffic stop told a story. Every interaction between an officer and a citizen was an opportunity to either build or break trust. The younger officer took her documents with a polite "Thank you, ma'am," and walked back to their patrol car to run her information. Carmen watched in her rearview mirror as the 2 officers talked quietly between themselves. She smiled slightly, knowing what was about to unfold. Inside the patrol car, the officers were about to discover something that would turn this routine traffic stop into one of the most memorable moments of their careers. But for now, Carmen sat patiently, her hands visible on the steering wheel, just as she'd advised countless citizens to do over her years of service. The night air was filled with the soft hum of distant traffic and the occasional crackle of the officer's radio. Nearby, a cricket chirped its evening song, completely unaware of the remarkable situation unfolding on this ordinary-looking street corner. This wasn't just going to be a story about a traffic stop. It was about to become a powerful lesson about assumptions, respect, and the unexpected ways life brings people together. And for these officers, it would be a night they'd never forget, though not for any of the reasons they might have imagined when they first turned on those flashing lights. Back at the patrol car, Officer Reynolds stared at the computer screen, his expression slowly changing. The soft glow of the laptop illuminated his face as he double-checked the information. His partner, Officer Parker, noticed something was different. "Everything okay?" Parker asked, leaning over to look at the screen. Reynolds rubbed his eyes, wondering if he was seeing things after their long shift. "You're not going to believe this," he said quietly, his voice a mix of surprise and something close to nervousness. The woman they'd pulled over wasn't just any driver with a temporary tag. Her name brought up an internal memo that had circulated through the department just hours earlier. The same memo he'd barely skimmed during his busy afternoon shift. Meanwhile, in her car, Carmen took slow, steady breaths. She'd been in law enforcement long enough to know that these moments, these simple traffic stops, could shape an officer's entire career. They could also shape a community's trust in its police force. She watched through her mirrors as the 2 officers had what appeared to be an intense discussion. Their body language told her the exact moment they made the connection. Officer Reynolds' shoulders straightened suddenly, and his partner took a small step back, looking at the computer screen again. Carmen thought back to her own days as a patrol officer. She remembered the countless traffic stops, the split-second decisions, the importance of treating every person with respect regardless of who they might be. Those experiences had shaped her approach to leadership and her vision for the department's future. The radio in their patrol car crackled with routine calls and updates, but the officers seemed frozen in place. Through her rearview mirror, Carmen could see them talking, gesturing, and occasionally glancing at her car. She couldn't help but smile slightly, not out of satisfaction at their discomfort, but at the valuable lesson unfolding naturally before them. Officer Parker cleared his throat and checked his uniform, smoothing down his shirt. Reynolds adjusted his badge, a nervous habit he'd developed over his years on the force. Both knew they needed to handle this situation carefully, but neither had been trained for exactly this scenario. The night had grown quieter now. A few cars passed by slowly, their drivers curious about the traffic stop. The red and blue lights continued their silent dance across the buildings and trees lining the street. In the distance, a siren wailed briefly and faded away. Other officers going about their regular duties, unaware of the remarkable scene unfolding here. Carmen noticed a young family walking on the sidewalk nearby, the parents instinctively pulling their children closer as they passed the police lights. It was exactly these small moments, these subtle reactions, that she hoped to address in her new role. Every interaction between police and the public sent ripples through the community, building or eroding trust one encounter at a time. The officers finally emerged from their patrol car, their movements now notably different from their earlier confident approach. Reynolds held her license and registration in his hand, but his usual routine had been thrown off balance. They walked back to her car with measured steps, their flashlights now lowered respectfully. This moment would test everyone involved. For Carmen, it was an unexpected opportunity to demonstrate her leadership style. For the officers, it was a chance to show their professionalism in an unusual situation. And for the department as a whole, it would become a story that would be told and retold, teaching valuable lessons about assumptions, respect, and the importance of treating every person with dignity, regardless of who they might turn out to be. The next few minutes would change the dynamic of their entire department, though none of them knew it yet. As Officer Reynolds approached her window again, the night air felt charged with possibility. This wasn't just about a traffic stop anymore. It was about to become something much more meaningful. Officer Reynolds took a deep breath before speaking, his voice noticeably softer than during their first interaction. "Ma'am, I apologize, but could you step out of the vehicle for a moment?" He paused, quickly adding, "Please." Carmen nodded, maintaining her calm demeanor. She didn't immediately mention her position. This was a teaching moment, and she wanted to see how they'd handle the situation. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out with the same deliberate movements she taught countless times in police academy lectures. The evening air had cooled considerably, and a gentle breeze rustled through nearby trees. Both officers stood a respectful distance away, their earlier routine confidence replaced by an almost formal uncertainty. Officer Parker kept glancing between his partner and Carmen, waiting to follow Reynolds' lead. "Your documentation seems to be in order," Reynolds said, holding her license like it might somehow change if he looked at it again. "The temporary tag matches your recently purchased vehicle." He cleared his throat, clearly struggling with how to proceed. Carmen decided to help ease the tension. "Is there anything else you need to verify, officers?" she asked professionally, her voice carrying the natural authority that had helped her rise through the ranks. She noticed how both officers straightened their posture almost instinctively in response. A car drove by slowly, its passengers curiously watching the scene. Officer Parker shifted his weight from one foot to the other, adjusting his belt in a nervous gesture. The patrol car's lights continued painting everything in alternating red and blue, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. "Chief Johnson," Reynolds finally said, speaking her title aloud as if to convince himself it was real. "We weren't aware. That is, we hadn't been officially." He stumbled over his words, something his colleagues would have found amusing if they'd been there to witness it. Carmen raised her hand slightly, a gentle gesture to pause his struggling explanation. Officers, you were doing your job. You noticed a temporary tag and decided to verify it. That's exactly what you should have done. Her words carried no hint of sarcasm or reproach, just simple, clear approval of proper procedure. Officer Parker relaxed slightly, though he still stood straighter than usual. We received the memo about your appointment just this afternoon. Chief, he explained, his voice carrying a mix of respect and lingering uncertainty. But your official start date wasn't until tomorrow. Carmen finished for him, allowing a small smile. Which technically means I'm just another citizen right now, doesn't it? The question wasn't meant to embarrass them, but to reinforce an important point about equal treatment under the law. A police radio crackled from their patrol car, the dispatcher's voice calling out numbers and codes for someone else's routine night. The familiar sound seemed to help ground all three of them in the moment. This was their world, the world of law enforcement, even if the roles had suddenly become more complicated. Reynolds looked down at her license again, then back at Carmen. Your documentation is all in order, Chief, he said, his professional training finally kicking back in. The temporary tag is properly displayed and matches your paperwork. The whole scene could have been tense or awkward, but Carmen's calm presence helped maintain an atmosphere of mutual respect. She knew these moments. These unexpected encounters often revealed more about people's character than any planned meeting ever could. Standing there on the quiet street, with the patrol car's lights still spinning and the night growing deeper, all three of them understood that this wasn't just about checking vehicle documentation anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and the complex relationships between law enforcement officers at every level. The next few minutes would prove crucial in setting the tone for Carmen's leadership of the department. But for now, she stood patiently, letting the officers work through this unexpected situation in their own way, knowing that sometimes the best lessons come from unplanned moments like these. The revelation hit both officers like a gentle wave. Officer Reynolds handed back Carmen's license and registration with a slightly trembling hand. The small movement caught the gleam of the streetlight, a subtle reminder of how quickly an ordinary evening had turned extraordinary. I suppose you'll want to tell everyone about this tomorrow, Officer Parker said softly, trying to break the tension with a touch of humor. His voice carried a hint of worry, though, the kind that comes when you realize you might have accidentally stumbled into a career-defining moment. Carmen tucked her documents away and looked at both officers thoughtfully. The night had grown quiet except for the distant sound of crickets and the occasional passing car. Actually, she said with a warm smile, I think this is a perfect opportunity for all of us to learn something. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and the patrol car's radio continued its steady stream of routine calls. But right here, in the small bubble of red and blue flashing lights, time seemed to slow down as the reality of the situation sank in deeper. You know, Carmen continued, her voice carrying the wisdom of years in law enforcement, every traffic stop teaches us something. Tonight, you've shown me exactly how our officers interact with the public when they think nobody important is watching. She paused, letting her words settle in the cool evening air. Officer Reynolds shifted his weight nervously. Chief, we followed standard procedure, he began, but Carmen raised her hand gently to stop him. That's exactly right, she said, her tone encouraging rather than critical. You did follow procedure. You were professional, courteous, and thorough. That's precisely what I wanted to see. The relief on both officers' faces was almost visible in the darkness. A gentle breeze rustled through nearby trees, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. Carmen looked at her watch. It was nearly 9 p.m. now. In less than 12 hours, she would officially step into her role as their chief. But this unexpected encounter had already started her work. You know what makes a good department great? She asked, not really expecting an answer. It's not just following procedures. It's about treating every single person we stop whether they're a teenager with a taillight out or a chief of police with temporary tags, with the same level of respect you've shown tonight. Both officers stood a little straighter, beginning to understand that this wasn't going to be the career-ending embarrassment they'd initially feared. Instead, it was turning into something quite different, a lesson in humanity and leadership that no police academy could ever quite teach. Tomorrow, Carmen continued, when you come into the station, I don't want you to worry about this stop. In fact, I want you to be proud of it, because this is exactly how we build trust in our community, one interaction at a time. A passing car slowed down, its driver curious about the scene. The officers noticed, but kept their attention on Carmen's words. The moment felt important, like something they'd remember for the rest of their careers. "Chief," Officer Parker ventured, his voice steadier now. "Thank you for handling this the way you did." His partner nodded in agreement, the earlier tension melting away into something that felt more like respect, not just for her rank, but for how she turned an awkward situation into a valuable lesson. The night air had grown cooler, and more cars were heading home for the evening. Tomorrow would bring a new day, new challenges, and officially, a new chief. But right here, right now, 3 law enforcement professionals stood together, understanding something profound about their chosen profession. "Well, officers," Carmen said finally, "I believe we all have reports to file. And I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be an interesting day for everyone." Her smile carried warmth and understanding, the kind of leadership that can't be taught in any academy. The next few minutes unfolded in a way none of them had expected when the evening began. Instead of quickly wrapping up the traffic stop, Carmen found herself leaning casually against her car, creating an impromptu sidewalk meeting that would set the tone for her entire leadership. "So tell me about your typical night shift," she asked, genuinely interested. The red and blue lights still painted the scene, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Gone was the tension of a traffic stop, replaced by something that felt more like a meaningful conversation between colleagues. Officer Reynolds glanced at his partner before responding. "Well, Chief, usually we patrol the northwest section. Lots of small businesses, a few residential areas. We try to be visible enough to prevent trouble, but not so present that people feel watched." A smile touched Carmen's lips. It was exactly the kind of balanced approach she hoped to encourage throughout the department. "And how do the local business owners respond to that strategy?" she asked, watching both officers carefully. The conversation flowed naturally now, with Officer Parker joining in. "Most appreciated, actually. We know all the late-night shop owners by name. There's a bakery that starts their morning prep at 3 a.m. We always check to make sure they're okay." A car drove past slowly, its driver probably wondering why 3 people were having what looked like a friendly chat next to a police car with flashing lights. The sight probably confused them. It wasn't the usual image of a traffic stop. "That's exactly the kind of community connection we need," Carmen said warmly. "It's not just about enforcing laws. It's about being part of the community we serve." She straightened up slightly, her professional instincts kicking in. "Though maybe we should wrap this up before someone calls in about suspicious activity." Both officers chuckled, some of their remaining nervousness finally dissolving. The night had turned into something unexpected, a chance to see their new chief as both a leader and a real person who understood their daily challenges. "You know," Carmen added, "I started just like you both. Night shifts, routine patrols, traffic stops. Every single one of those experiences taught me something valuable." She paused, looking at the quiet street around them. "Including this one." Officer Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "Chief, if you don't mind me asking, what made you decide to tell us who you were? You could have just let us finish the stop normally." The question hung in the air for a moment as Carmen considered her response. A nearby streetlight flickered, and somewhere in the distance, a siren briefly wailed and faded away. The usual symphony of city nights. "Because leadership isn't about titles or surprise reveals," she answered honestly. "It's about transparency, respect, and learning from every situation." Tonight, I learned about two officers who conduct their stops professionally, even when they think nobody's watching. That tells me more than any formal meeting ever could. Parker's radio crackled with a routine check-in from dispatch. He responded quickly, then turned back to the conversation. "We should probably get back to our patrol," he said, though his tone suggested he'd rather continue this unexpected meeting. Carmen nodded in agreement. "Tomorrow's going to be a busy day for all of us," she said, standing up straight. "But before you go, just remember something. Every person you stop, every call you respond to, that's someone's story. Tonight, you became part of my story, and I became part of yours." The officers straightened their uniforms, preparing to return to their regular duties. But something had shifted in their understanding of both their new chief and their own roles in the department. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. It had become a moment of connection, understanding, and mutual respect. "Have a safe night, officers," Carmen said, reaching for her car door. "And thank you for doing your job exactly the way it should be done." Her words carried the weight of sincere appreciation, not just the authority of her position. The morning sun had barely peeked over the city skyline when word of last night's traffic stop began spreading through the police station like wildfire. Officers gathering for the morning briefing whispered among themselves, coffee cups pausing midway to lips as the story was passed from person to person. "Did you hear what happened to Reynolds and Parker last night?" The question bounced around the briefing room, followed by mixed reactions of disbelief, amusement, and nervous anticipation. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 8 a.m., the time their new chief would officially start her first day. Officer Reynolds sat quietly in the back of the room, sipping his coffee and watching his colleagues speculate. He barely slept after his shift, replaying the previous night's events in his mind. His partner, Parker, hadn't even bothered trying to sleep, choosing instead to polish his badge and shoes until they gleamed. At exactly 7:55 a.m., the station's front desk officer's voice crackled over the radio. "Chief's vehicle approaching." The casual chatter in the briefing room died immediately, replaced by the sound of chairs scraping and uniforms being straightened. Through the station's windows, they watched as a familiar dark blue sedan pulled into the reserved parking space. Carmen stepped out, briefcase in hand, wearing a crisp police uniform with chief's insignia that somehow looked both authoritative and approachable. The front desk officer, who had heard the story but hadn't quite believed it, stood a little straighter as Carmen walked through the doors. "Good morning, Chief Johnson," he managed to say, his voice carrying a mix of respect and curiosity. Carmen smiled warmly. "Good morning, everyone," she replied, her voice carrying naturally through the now quiet station. She paused, looking around at the faces, some curious, some nervous, all attentive. "I see news travels fast in our department." A few nervous chuckles broke the tension. At the back of the room, Reynolds and Parker exchanged glances, unsure whether to speak up or remain quiet. But Carmen's next words put everyone at ease. "Well, since I'm sure everyone's wondering, yes, I was pulled over last night. And yes, it was probably the best thing that could have happened." She set her briefcase down and leaned casually against a desk, breaking the formal atmosphere. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor as officers shifted, relaxed, and began to see their new chief as someone who understood their daily experiences. "You see," Carmen continued, "last night taught me something important about our department. It showed me that our officers do their jobs professionally and respectfully, even when they think nobody's watching." Her eyes met Reynolds and Parker's briefly, carrying a look of genuine appreciation. The coffee maker in the break room gurgled its last few drops, and somewhere a phone rang unanswered. Everyone was too focused on Carmen's words to move. "Some of you might think Officers Reynolds and Parker had a rough night," she said, a slight smile playing at her lips. "But what they actually had was a moment of truth, and they passed with flying colors. They showed exactly the kind of professional courtesy and respect that I hope to see throughout our department." A senior sergeant near the front nodded approvingly. He'd been worried about having a new chief, But this approach, this understanding of street-level policing, was exactly what the department needed. "Now," Carmen said, picking up her briefcase again, "I believe we have a morning briefing to attend. And maybe afterward, we can all hear Officer Reynolds tell his side of the story." Her light tone brought genuine smiles to faces around the room. As she walked toward her office, officers parted respectfully, but not fearfully. The nervous tension that had filled the station just minutes before had been replaced by something else, a sense of genuine respect and cautious optimism about their new leadership. From his spot near the back, Officer Reynolds finally allowed himself to relax. What had seemed like a potential career disaster just hours ago had somehow transformed into something entirely different, a moment that would define not just his career, but the entire department's new direction. The main conference room was packed by 9:30 a.m. Officers filled every chair, with some standing along the walls, all waiting for their first official department meeting with Chief Johnson. The usual pre-meeting chatter was quieter than normal, mixed with an air of anticipation. The room itself, with its worn chairs and slightly outdated projector screen, had seen countless meetings before, but today felt different. Even the morning sunlight streaming through the blinds seemed to carry a sense of change. Right on schedule, Carmen walked in, carrying a single notebook. No PowerPoint presentations, no fancy handouts, just straightforward communication. She took her place at the front of the room, surveying the faces before her, recognizing the mix of curiosity and uncertainty in their expressions. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I had planned a very different first meeting. I had speeches prepared, policy changes to discuss, all the usual first-day material." She paused, letting a small smile form. But sometimes life gives us better teaching moments than any planned presentation. A few officers shifted in their seats, while others leaned forward slightly. Through the thin walls, they could hear the regular sounds of the station. Phones ringing, doors opening and closing, the constant rhythm of daily police work. "Last night," Carmen continued, "I was pulled over for having temporary tags on my new car." She noticed several officers glancing towards Reynolds and Parker, who were trying their best to look professional despite being the center of attention. "Now I could stand here and talk about procedure and protocol. I could discuss department policies and future plans." She moved away from the podium, making the conversation more personal. "But instead, I want to talk about what that traffic stop really showed us." The air conditioning hummed softly in the background as Carmen walked slowly around the room. "When those lights came on behind me, I wasn't Chief Johnson yet. I was just another driver with temporary tags. And that's exactly how I was treated, with respect, professionalism, and courtesy." She stopped near Reynolds and Parker. These officers didn't know who I was, but they did their job exactly as they should. They were thorough but polite, professional but human. That's not something you can fake when a supervisor is watching. An older sergeant in the front row nodded appreciatively. He'd been on the force for 20 years and had seen his share of new chiefs come and go. But this approach, using a real experience to make a point, felt genuine. "Here's what I want everyone to understand," Carmen continued, her voice carrying warmth and conviction. "Every traffic stop, every call, every interaction with the public, that's our chance to show who we really are as a department. We never know who we're dealing with, but it shouldn't matter." The room was completely silent now, every person focused on her words. Through the windows, they could see the city they served waking up, going about its daily business, unaware of this important moment in their local police department. "Some of you might think Officers Reynolds and Parker had bad luck last night," she said, a gentle smile playing at her lips. "But I think we all got lucky. They showed me, and now everyone in this room, what this department is capable of at its best." Carmen walked back to the front of the room, picking up her notebook. "So yes, we'll talk about policies and procedures. We'll discuss changes and improvements. But first, I want everyone to understand something." She paused, making eye contact with different officers around the room. The way those officers treated an unknown driver last night. That's our new standard. Not because they might be pulling over their boss, but because every single person deserves that level of respect and professionalism. The morning sun had risen higher now, its light filling the room with a warm glow. Officers exchanged glances, nodding in understanding. What could have been an embarrassing incident had instead become a powerful lesson in leadership and integrity. Over the next few months, the story of that night's traffic stop became something of a legend in the department. But more importantly, it sparked real change. The kind of change that doesn't just show up in policy manuals, but in the everyday interactions between officers and the community they served. Chief Johnson's first major initiative was surprisingly simple. She started riding along with different patrol units every week, not as a supervisor checking up on her officers, but as someone genuinely interested in seeing their daily challenges and successes. One particularly memorable evening, she sat in the passenger seat while Officer Reynolds handled a tense situation with a teenager who'd been caught spray painting behind a local store. Instead of immediately going for handcuffs, Reynolds talked to the kid, learned about his interest in art, and ended up connecting him with a local youth center's mural program. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Carmen had said afterward, writing notes in her small notebook. "We're not just here to enforce laws. We're here to build bridges." The pride in Reynolds' eyes showed he understood exactly what she meant. The department's training programs started changing too. Instead of just focusing on procedures and protocols, they began including real stories from the field. Parker, who'd been quiet and reserved before, found himself regularly speaking to new recruits about that famous traffic stop and what it had taught him about treating everyone with respect. Community meetings, which used to draw only a handful of people, started getting crowded. Residents noticed the difference in how officers interacted with them. The same cops who'd once seemed distant and official were now familiar faces who knew people's names and asked about their families. One day, a local shop owner brought coffee and donuts to the station. "You know," he said to the desk sergeant, "last week one of your officers helped my elderly mother change a flat tire. Didn't just call a tow truck. Actually got down there and did the work himself." That's the kind of thing people remember. The change wasn't just in how officers treated the public, it showed in how they treated each other too. The break room, once divided between different shifts and units, became a place where stories and experiences were shared openly. Veterans started mentoring rookies not just in procedures, but in how to connect with the community. During one afternoon shift change, an officer shared how he'd helped a homeless man find shelter instead of just asking him to move along. Another talked about spending extra time helping a lost tourist find their way, even though it wasn't technically police business. These weren't just stories. They were proud examples of their new approach to policing. Carmen made sure these positive interactions were recognized, not with fancy ceremonies or medals, but with simple acknowledgments that meant more because they were genuine. She'd stop officers in the hallway, mention something specific she'd heard about their work, and thank them personally. The numbers started telling their own story too. Complaint rates dropped, community cooperation increased, officers reported higher job satisfaction. But the real changes were in the things you couldn't measure. The smiles from local kids when they saw a patrol car, the grateful nods from shopkeepers during night patrols, the way people started seeing their police department as part of the community rather than just watching over it. One evening, while reviewing monthly reports in her office, Carmen found a letter from an elderly resident. "Last night," it read, "one of your officers stopped to help me carry my groceries. When I thanked him, he said something that stuck with me. 'We're here to serve, ma'am, not just enforce. I don't know what's changed at your department, but whatever it is, it's working.'" She smiled, remembering that night she was pulled over. What could have been just another traffic stop had instead become the catalyst for real change. Not through big policies or dramatic reforms, but through the simple principle of treating every person with respect and dignity. 1 year had passed since that fateful traffic stop. The police station buzzed with activity as officers gathered for a special anniversary meeting. The same conference room that had hosted Carmen's first speech now looked different, walls adorned with community thank you letters and photos of officers engaging with residents at local events. Chief Johnson stood at the front, looking at the familiar faces before her. Some were new, others had been there that memorable first morning, but all shared something special, a deep understanding of what true community policing meant. A year ago, she began, her voice carrying the warmth of experience. Two officers pulled over a car with temporary tags. They had no idea that simple traffic stop would change not just our department, but police departments across the country. Outside, the sounds of the city drifted in through open windows. Children laughing at a nearby playground, cars passing, the everyday symphony of community life. These weren't just background noises anymore. They were reminders of the people they served. Our numbers tell an amazing story, Carmen continued, turning to a simple chart on the wall. Civilian complaints down by 60%. Community participation in police programs up by 80%. But the real story isn't in these numbers. It's in the stories I hear every day. She picked up a stack of papers from the podium, like this letter from the Downtown Business Association, praising Officer Parker for organizing midnight basketball games that have practically eliminated late-night vandalism, or this note about Officer Reynolds mentoring at-risk youth in his spare time. The room felt different from a year ago, not just physically, but in its energy. Gone was the nervous tension of that first meeting, replaced by quiet pride and shared purpose. Even the newest recruits sat up straighter, already part of something bigger than themselves. Our story has traveled far, Carmen said, holding up a national police journal. Departments across the country are asking how we did it. They want to know our secret. She smiled, looking around the room. But there is no secret. We just learned to see every interaction, every traffic stop, every call as a chance to make a difference. Through the windows, they could see two officers helping an elderly man cross the street, taking their time, chatting with him. A year ago, that might have seemed like wasted patrol time. Now everyone understood. This was exactly what policing should be. Remember that teenager we caught spraying graffiti? Carmen asked. Yesterday, he unveiled his first commission mural at the youth center. Officer Reynolds was there, beaming like a proud uncle. Quiet chuckles filled the room. They all knew the story, but it never got old. She walked to the center of the room, her voice growing more personal. But here's what really matters. Last week, I overheard two rookie officers talking. One asked the other why we do things differently here. You know what the response was? She paused, looking around. Because here, we treat everyone like they could be the chief. Laughter rippled through the room, but it was the kind that comes with understanding. They got the deeper meaning. It was never about who someone might be. It was about who they were as officers, as public servants, as human beings. That traffic stop taught us something powerful, Carmen concluded. It showed us that every interaction matters, that respect goes both ways, and that real change starts with how we treat each person we meet. That's not just a lesson for police work. That's a lesson for life. As the meeting ended and officers filed out, many stopped to look at the newest addition to the wall. A framed photo of a dark blue sedan with temporary tags, parked under a streetlight. Below it, a simple caption read, "Where it all began." Outside, the city continued its daily rhythm, but something was different now. The gap between the police and the community they served had narrowed, replaced by understanding, respect, and trust. All because of one routine traffic stop that turned out to be anything but routine.